with regard to depression, I often tell people it's a little bit like having asthma. In the model of asthma, being in such a tightly controlled religious group where you have to live as a false self when you're looking at leaving, breaking out, is a profound stressor for you. To then lose all of your social supports and structure for approaching the world is another very major stressor. In the model of asthma, this is like being in a very smoky environment. It can really stir up your problem, your lung problem in asthma. In depression, it can really profoundly influence your brain function. Of course, it's important to get into a better environment. Cleaner air would be the case for asthma, and it can be a great help. But there are many people who are going to need ongoing treatment. Yeah. And so with depression, I think it can be a great relief to find more, should we say, true supports that support who you really are, rather than having to maintain this false self. Like when people, gay people or transgendered people come out to their family and friends, they may suffer some rejection, but actually get a lot of new relationships and a great freedom to be who they are. But it doesn't necessarily prevent them from being depressed. It's often a great improvement, but the medical illness of depression may still need to be treated, and is not something that's entirely related to their spiritual environment and their community environment, but it is very closely tied to it. You can get religious messages that any loss of faith is a weakness or a moral failure on your part. You can also get messages from people around you who may not understand mental health issues that distress, loss of drive, loss of motivation is some personal weakness or laziness rather than an illness. And the key message I'd give to people in this situation, and in one sense it's the same message that people should get who haven't, where the stress hasn't been about leaving a tight, knit religious community and loss of faith, is that that depression is an illness, but it's a treatable illness, and it's a potentially fatal illness. We saw some women honestly and openly talking about the detailed preparations for suicide, the morbid thinking that they wished they would die, which as a psychiatrist alarms me. There are many people who may have a barrier to suicide, whether it be based on faith or protecting their children, but who may not intend to commit suicide, but who can't help but think about death, wish for it. But sometimes I say, oh look, I wish I had cancer, because then I could die and people wouldn't blame me for suicide, and then it would be over. But so to me, morbid thinking, focusing on death, is a risk, is a grave concern. That the single best thing we can do is identify and treat depression. It saves lives to do so. And so I'd really just try and emphasise for those people that depression is a treatable illness. It's not a weakness. And that it's completely understandable to have a degree of depression when you feel cut adrift from all of your social supports and your world has been turned on its axis. But understandable is not the same as untreatable. And we've had a discussion about, whilst there's a lifting of the veil of control and of having to maintain a false self within a controlled and prescribed community, there's not always a support system to replace that. And even the fallback that most of us have if our world collapses, that we can always go to our family, isn't available to people who've left the witnesses' folds. So the assumption that when I leave, depression will lift is potentially a risky or dangerous one. I think there's also a process of transition to setting up healthy supports and social relationships outside. And even with unfortunately, mood disorders don't always respect how much support and resources you have. I think Robin Williams' death by suicide really brought that to all of us, that, despite maximal resources and best treatment and a lot of insight and a lot of humour, unfortunately depression kills people. It's the leading cause of death for under 45-year-old Australians. And one of the things that mediates the move from struggling with depression to a conviction of certainty about suicide is a sense of despair, a sense that there is no hope. In animal models of depression, where we chemically depress an animal or situationally depress an animal, the test to see whether the animal is still depressed is, does it give up trying to escape a bad situation quickly? Does it give up? Does it despair? If a mouse is hung by its tail, does it stop struggling? Sounds a bit cruel thing to do to mice, but the test of whether you're depressed is, do you have hope? And it's a particularly damaging situation that the ladies described, where they didn't feel there was any hope or possibility of leading a positive life after being shunned. They didn't feel there was any hope or possibility of leading a positive life whilst they were within the fold, because they didn't truly believe in it and it wasn't fulfilling for them, prevented from being educated. Yeah. And the death seemed to be the only potential solace. And just in case they felt that over time they might be able to escape, to also predict Armageddon was around the corner, really robs them of any sense of hope. And I can see how despair would be fostered in that situation. If you feel depressed, trapped, despairing, there's no hope of escape, then I think the risk of suicide is really a significant one that I'd encourage people to think through, and the help that I'd encourage them to seek. And ultimately that's a mixture of professional assistance when it's warranted, but also it's a vital thing to be able to talk to people who've gone through a process like the one they're undertaking, and that's where I think support groups can be really, really important in a situation like this. It's a very wise thing for people leaving the fold to seek out people who've made that transition ahead of them.